Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sleepless in Cyber. I've been out for about a month. I've been changing jobs, kind of getting everything settled with the new position, and otherwise having a great January. For those that took a look at our December episode, that was a something for my daughter. She wanted me to do a Christmas episode, so I put together a small little Christmas episode for her to ring out the end of the year. And I took the January off to, like I said, to get to the new job and to kind of get settled on that. So I've got a new episode tonight. Tonight we're going to be covering vulnerability assessment reports, and this is a really great topic. This has come back over a couple of times over the last month for a variety of things. I've worked with some clients. I've talked to a lot of people, and it's a topic that has come up, and I really want to cover it tonight to kind of give people an understanding of what to do with the reports and what they mean and how they can use the reports to help their organization. So, uh, just to catch everybody up, so I do these Sleepless in Cybers as a cover for topics that we are doing as CISOs in our organizations. A lot of times we don't have time during the day to do them. We're in meetings. We're doing a variety of things for the business. And so a lot of us spend the evenings working on stuff that we weren't able to get done during the day. And I thought, well, let's record some of the stuff that I do at night. Thus, the Midnight CISO streamcast, or the Sleepless in Cyber name, came around because this is when we do this stuff. So, all right, let's get into vulnerability assessment reports. One thing I want to do is really kind of cover the terminology, because I think a lot of people misunderstand what a vulnerability assessment report is. It is not a pen test necessarily. This is a tool that is run on the IP ranges or the IPs of your organization, effectively looking for computers and looking for known vulnerabilities of those computers. You've got passive scanners and active scanners. You have authenticated scans. You have non-authenticated scans, and we're going to cover all of those really quickly. Number one, if you just use a tool to scan all the computers on your network to see if they have any open ports, responding applications, things like that, you're going to get a report, basically the same type of information that a hacker from the outside of your network looking in is going to see. Here is your IPs. This is what we think it is. This is the open ports. It's going to do that port scan. It's going to do kind of all those processes. Using the vulnerability scanner to do an authenticated scan gives you much more detail. So the tool will get user credentials or some sort of access to the local machine. It gets onto the machine and scans on the inside of the machine. So it's much more detailed. You get much more information from that. So you're looking for vulnerabilities, applications, patch level, all these different things. So you definitely want, if you're going to get a vulnerability scan and an associated report, you definitely want an authenticated scan. Now, a lot of times you need to have an agent installed so it can run the scan. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you'll just log into the machine and try to use a variety of tools to get information from it and then pull that back out into the vulnerability scanner tool. Now, when either an internal member of your team or an external member, like a third-party assessor, comes in to do this report, they're going to scan. It might take them a couple of days. It might take them overnight. It might take, depending on how big your environment is, it may take some time. It'll scan, it'll pull this information in, and then there'll be a report. A lot of times they'll give you a report directly from the tool. Sometimes they will take that report and make it look and feel like one of their standard reports with their name on it and things. But it all generally has the same information on it. I don't generally like using real information for this particular streamcast, so I'm going to. I did not have a fake vulnerability scanner, and I couldn't find one that was publicly available. So we're going to actually use some sample documents that are provided by one of the major vulnerability scanner tools that are out there, specifically Tenable Nessus Pro, or Nessus. This is something I've used in the past. I like the tool. I like the reports that comes out of it. There's a lot of other tools out there. You have to find the tool that works in your environment that people like to use, or you get the tool that the third party vendor that you're using likes to use. But the reports are all generally the same. I mean, you've got some level of vulnerabilities, critical and high and medium and low, and it'll give you, here's all the machines, here's the IP addresses, here's the vulnerabilities on these IPs, here's a list of all your vulnerabilities and how many do you have. You'll have a variety of things. So sometimes you can have it pointed to, I need a specific report for PCI or a specific report for, let's say, NIST or ISO or HIPAA. And those are custom reports, usually by the application or by the firm that's doing it. But the scanner goes out there, it runs, it gets information, comes back, and a report gets generated. Now, what do you do with these reports? This is the key issue, and this is why I really wanted to cover this tonight, is because I think a lot of organizations have a misunderstanding of what to do with those reports. And it's not, when they get the report, they look at it, sometimes they get overwhelmed. Sometimes they look at that report and they go, I don't know how to fix this stuff. I don't know where to start. I don't have a security team. I don't have these things. So those are things that you kind of have to take into consideration of, if you're having a report done, there are going to be resources you need to throw into it to remedy or mitigate the things that you find in that report. But it's not hard. It's just like any other security. You take it pieces at a time and you really break it down and you start thinking about it from a management level decision, and it becomes a little bit easier. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to take these reports, and we're going to break them down, and we're going to think about the decisions we have to make about them and why we have to make them. That's another critical piece. Is if you have a report that's telling you have critical vulnerabilities on your network, you are probably now responsible for those. Now, you're responsible for them all the time. I mean, you need to know what's on your network. You need to have a vulnerability scan on your network done so you know what's out there. But now that you have the report, you're responsible for fixing those. And you don't want to get into a situation where you don't fix them and there could be harm. Somebody might get hurt, somebody might die, might have loss of service, you might have loss of productivity, you might have, and you can probably be held responsible for that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my screen here. And specifically what I want to do is not have the screen in screen. I'm not really sure why my ATEM is not happy at the moment. There we go. I guess I just had to click the right buttons, the right combination of buttons. So like I said, we are using tonight the Tenable, and these are our sample reports that Tenable provides on their website. And just as a side note, Cody Dumont, I know Cody. I've worked with him in the past. He's a great guy, and I really respect what he does for Tenable and for the documentation he creates and the work that he does, both in the job and out. You know, he's I really like seeing him on LinkedIn. So if you get an opportunity, go catch him on LinkedIn, and he does some great stuff. So the Tenable platform, or Nessus, specifically Nessus reports, they have a variety of reports that they provide. We're going to start with just some basics. We're going to look at this one. And and like I said, this is a sample thing they put on their website. It's got some basic information on here, which I think is useful, and we're going to use it as an example. So here is a vulnerability report. We can ignore the 1 year old report because we don't care about that at this moment. Um, but this is going to be very similar to what you would get from an assessment tool or from a vendor. They're going to give you a report that will probably have a list of vulnerabilities that it found and how many machines you found it on. And it's going to have some sort of rating. In this case, it's going to be severity and what plugin ID and stuff. But what we care about today is severity, plugin name, and count for this particular report. Now, I get this report and I start looking. It's like SSL RC4 Cipher Suite supported, blah, 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 MS16047, MS15011, MS15124, security advisory. That's a lot of information. If you're not in security and you don't know how to decipher the MS16047, the MS16044, don't worry about it. We can go into that and learning the jargon and learning all this stuff much, much later. But let's just look at this from a specific management perspective. This is a report that is provided to you by some sort of tool or expert telling you you have these many things that are vulnerable on your network. Now, one of them down here is critical. It has a severity label of critical. Some of them have high, some of them have medium, and there's not a low on this particular page, but that's fine. Let me ask you this, and I want you to think about this. So in this case, we've got critical vulnerability that's on 66 machines, count of 66. So this tool thinks we have a significant vulnerability on 66 of our machines, or it found it 66 times. Let's think about what significant would be. In this particular case, a security update for Windows Hyper-V. So this is a problem. Now, I could go and do a search for MS16045, and let's do that. MS16. It would help if my fingers 045. This is a Microsoft Security Bulletin. It resolves vulnerabilities in Microsoft Windows. The most severe vulnerabilities could allow remote code execution. Now, that piece right there, remote code execution. This particular vulnerability from Microsoft, that is a known vulnerability, allows remote code execution if an authenticated attacker on a guest operating system runs a specifically crafted application. All right, let's talk about what that means. If a device, specifically a Hyper-V environment, has this vulnerability, some user on some guest or VM, virtual machine, can run remote code execution. They can send a command out of the VM and run something. Think about them deciding to run shut down now, or delete everything, or create a domain admin. All these different things. This is serious. This is something that somebody could run remote code execution. So when we're looking at this, if you see critical in this particular report, it's probably similar to that. It's significant. It's remote code execution or remote access or clear text passwords or whatever it is. It's serious. It's a major issue. If it's a high, let's look at a high one. So this one is MS15011. 011. So let's do MS15011. Let's see what that one looks like. Group policy could allow remote code execution. So here's another one that specifically remote code execution. Vulnerability could allow remote code execution if an attacker convinces a user with a domain configured system to connect to an attacker's controlled network. So it's a little harder, but it's still it's possible that this vulnerability allows a malicious actor to run remote code if certain things happen. So let's just think about that. You just now got a report. Let's say you got this report right here, and you had 66 machines that had a significant vulnerability in Hyper V. And you had 95 machines that had a significant vulnerability in a device that's got group policy on it. Both of these have some sort of remote code execution. So an attacker could use this vulnerability to run code on a system that could do bad things. Now, when I say run code, again, that could mean delete everything. That could mean give admin rights to an external attacker in another country. It could mean a lot of different things. So now I'm thinking of this as a CISO, as a manager, as an IT manager, and I go, okay, well, I've got, 95, 95, 92, 91, 91, 66. So I've got a lot of vulnerabilities sitting on my network that is of high priority that someone could run and has probably run remote code execution on my devices. This is where, when you are looking at this report, your eye should be drawn to things that are critical and high and even medium. But if it's red, it's probably on the report means, hey, bad stuff, and let's take a look at this. What do you do? I mean, what do you do in your organization? I was talking to someone the other day specifically about this, and they just flat out said that they were overwhelmed by this sort of report. They don't even know where to start. And I go, okay, here's how you need to think about it. I'm an auditor, and I come in and I see that you have this report. You have this report in your hands. And I'm the auditor, or I'm the investigator. Let's say something bad has happened and I'm the investigator. And I'm going to go, okay, you had this report and you see that you've got 66 critical things, and those allow for remote. Why didn't you fix those first? You knew they were critical. You knew that they were remote code executions. So they were highest risk in your environment. Why didn't you fix those first? And the person stopped and they go, I didn't think of it like that. Now, we all know critical might be the highest risk. They might be, something that you need to focus on, but it doesn't click until someone questions you on it. So what I encourage people to do is don't think of this as, oh, it's overwhelming. It's a huge amount of stuff. Think about what you need to do first, second, third, and fourth. What do you need to do immediate, and what do you need to make a plan for? And how are you going to defend that to an auditor or an investigator? So again, if I'm the auditor, if I'm the investigator, and I'm coming in and I say, okay, I see you have this report that you got from, let's say, your third-party vendor, and you had 66 critical things there. What did you do to fix those immediately? You knew about them. What did you do to fix them? Then I'm going to say, okay, you've got all these other high things that when we look, they are also remote code. What did you do to fix those immediately? In these medium things, those aren't as high priority, but what is your plan on fixing those over the next 6 months or over the next year? Do you get kind of how to think about that? So we're looking at this stuff. We're looking at this report of, okay, what do I need to fix right now? I need to put time in, put resources in to fix this problem right now. What do I need to start planning for to fix this week? What are the things I need to fix this quarter, this year? Well, when you start thinking about it like that, it feels like it becomes just a little bit easier to grasp where your priorities need to lie. Let's fix the highest risk things to the organization. Now, Okay, and let me not use that word. Fix is not the right word because we're not necessarily fixing the problem in terms of can I put this patch on. What we're trying to do is mitigate the risk of those devices having that particular patch. So it could be that I implement additional security controls because I can't implement the patch. Maybe the patch doesn't work with a piece of software, or that device just can't be updated anymore, it's too old. But it's still my job to mitigate the risk to the organization. So I may not fix it in the traditional sense, but my job is to mitigate the risk. You know, I need to eliminate as much risk as I possibly can and still maintain that system. So when I see these 66 things that I need to patch or fix, or I need to figure out a way to mitigate the risk. And I think that that's really, really important because sometimes you have to have that device or that software or that whatever with that vulnerability still there, still on your network. So you wrap firewalls around it or other versions of security controls to mitigate the risk to the environment. Okay, so let's look at this again. I'm an auditor or I'm an investigator. I'm going to use investigator just because I need to pick a word and use. So I'm an investigator. You have this report. I'm asking you, okay, I see you had these 66 things. Show me your documentation. Show me your processes that you use to fix these things or mitigate the risk of these things. When did you do it? Did you do it immediately? Did you do it as soon as you possibly could? Or did you push it off for 6 months, a year? Same thing with high. Did you fix them immediately? Did you have a plan to fix them? Did you do change management to fix them? What about medium? What about low? That's the questions that I, as an investigator, am going to ask you. So that's where you need to start putting in those processes in your own head to be able to take this information and go, okay, what do we need to do first? What is critical? What is the biggest risk mitigation that we can do for the organization? And in this case, I would say probably those 66 devices that have this critical, let's go patch. And if we went and looked at the patch or looked at the fix, security update addresses the vulnerability by correcting the Hyper-V validates got user input. Okay, so to fix this particular vulnerability, you have to do your patches. Fair enough. Some inside baseball there. A lot of times, a good patch management system or process will fix a lot of these vulnerabilities, but we won't go too much into that. So in this case, I got 66 devices that I need to go deploy patches on. Now, again, think of it from an investigator's point of view. Oh, the fix is updates. Does that mean you're not patching your servers? What's your patch policy? Who does your patches? What's your patch validation? So do you see how those questions start tumbling? You know, it's not so much that you have the vulnerabilities there. I mean, that's really important. But me as the investigator, I'm going to ask why? Why did you have this was taken care of. This MS 16045 was taken care of by doing patches, regular security updates. And if you had done those security updates, you wouldn't necessarily have this critical patch. So I'm going to start asking these questions of, okay, why weren't they patched? How long did it take you to patch them? How are you going to future-proof this process to ensure that patches get put on in the future? Now, I will tell you, these are very uncomfortable questions to answer, especially when you have 66 of them here. Unless your environment is, a couple 100,000 servers. That's why we need to think of it internally. That's how I help organizations is I come in and I act like the investigator or the auditor, and I go, okay, well, I'm going to ask these questions, and I'm going to ask the hard questions because I know that this is what this other group is going to do when they come in because of an issue. Now, why would they ask these questions? A lot of people, somebody has asked me that. A lot of people have asked me that. Well, why would they ask those questions? Because you don't normally have an investigator come into your organization and start asking questions unless there's been a problem or you've signed some agreement to allow them in or whatever. So let's set up a scenario here, kind of a mini tabletop. Let's say you first quarter have gotten this report. You had a third party assessor come in. They have provided you this report, this particular one, this vulnerability scan. And then second quarter, you have a incident. Let's say you had a ransomware attack, and it took down your entire system. And you're a hospital. And because the system was down, you had to turn away clients, or you had to turn away emergency personnel, ambulances that were coming in, so you had to turn them away, and someone passes away. Now, this has happened. This has happened. I think it was in Germany back 2 years ago. But hospital, ransomware, had to turn away patients. Patient dies. So now the investigators are coming back because we have someone that has passed away because they were not able to get treatment in your hospital because your systems were taken down by ransomware. And the investigator goes, okay, give me your scan reports for the last 3 quarters, maybe the last quarter, and you provide them this report. And they're going to go, okay, you've got 66 criticals here. What did you do to fix them? Are they still vulnerable? Because the investigator is going to go run a report. Your forensics team is going to go run a report. Hey, what happened? They're going to run another scan. And if their new scan shows the exact same things you had in the old scan that were unpatched, that investigator is going to be really irritable. It's just a reality, because what it's shown is you knew about the problems. You have gotten a report telling you the problems, and these reports actually do provide solutions in some cases, and you didn't fix them. That becomes a real problem. So now you can see why the investigators would be interested in this report and interested in making sure that, number one, you're getting the report, and number two, that you're doing something with the report, that you're going through and you're mitigating risk as best you can. Now, let's say you can't mitigate a risk. You have patched as much as you can. You have implemented security controls. You put in extra monitoring and extra logging to alert you of the risk, but you can't actually get rid of it. There's just no possible way. If you've done all that other stuff, I think the investigator is going to go, okay, you knew about the risk. You implemented as many security controls as you could. You put monitoring in to monitor it. You've done some risk transference, so you've gotten some insurance. You've gotten people aware. You've gotten people on your incident response team looking for this. You have, as much as you could, mitigated that risk. That's the thing. That's the key. You can't ignore it. You have to implement what you can. Implement your resources, implement money. It might be time. It might be new systems, new hardware, new software, whatever you need to do to mitigate the risk to the organization. And if you've gone through those steps, if you saw this 66, and let's say you were able to mitigate 64 of them, you had 2 you couldn't get rid of. The investigator is going to come in and say, show me the report. They show the report. You had 66. You run a new report. You only have 2, but you have all your documentation that everything you did on those 2 was the best that you could do to protect the systems or the users or whatever you needed to do. I think that would help. They may not like it. They may not like that you had any vulnerabilities, but that would help, showing you did due diligence into protecting your organization. I hope I'm not, beating a dead horse here. I'm really trying to make sure that people understand the mindset you have to get in to be able to look at these reports. If you see the problem, you see these criticals, you need to take action on them. And you can very well start with saying, okay, we have these criticals. We're going to need to start here first. Then we move to the highs, and then we move to the mediums. And that's perfectly fine. The issue is, as long as you've stepped up to making those changes, and as long as you're working through the process of fixing these problems, you're doing a good job. I would say you're doing a pretty good job. I think that you could define that for a judge or in a jury, to an investigator, to law enforcement, that you're taking those steps. Not, people don't have unlimited resources. They don't have unlimited people and time. So you've got to do what you can. So you do step by step. All right, so I'm going to jump out, and we're going to look at one of the other reports, hosts. No, let's do. Here's a vulnerability. The so, okay, so let's talk about ratings, VFR, CVSS, and things like that. Um, there is some concern out there about, when we were talking about a vulnerability, of what is critical, what is high priority. Um, there's a lot of things that people get in arguments over. This is how I look at it. If you have this report and you have something that says critical, and you have to give that to an investigator or a judge, they're going to take it that that is critical, that you should have fixed it. Is it possible to rename and relabel these? Sure. I mean, a lot of reports you can do that. Is it possible for you to take something that this report says is critical, and it may have a certain level of severity, and you have intentionally says that's not that important, we don't care about that? Here's a perfect example. Let's say I'm doing a pen test, a physical pen test on an organization, and I go in, um, and I've done these, and I've helped organizations with this. Is not my primary job, but let's just talk about it, as if it was. I go in, and I find a door that I can shim open with a traveler's pick, an ice pick. And I put that on the report saying, this is high risk. This needs to be fixed immediately. It's a problem. Here's the door. It's blah, blah, blah door in this hallway in this building. And I put it in my report that this is high priority. Excuse me. Well, I understand that, yes, that lock is vulnerable to someone with an ice pick or a traveler's pick to be able to open it. But it's a door to a closet. Not a really high priority for me in the organization. I really don't care if that particular closet with hanging clothes in it can get picked. So I might put in my documentation that this door is a closet. It's not a high priority. We're not going to worry about it. In fact, it stays unlocked most of the time, so it doesn't really matter. Now, if that door was to your data center and they were to open it with the traveler's pick, that's a little different, and that becomes a different issue. But it's all in context. One door is very, very vulnerable, but who cares? One is very, very vulnerable, but you got data center behind there. You absolutely focus on the door that's got the highest risk to the organization, which is the one that's going into your data center. So these reports are very similar to that. If you have a machine that has a particular vulnerability on it that is high risk, so it's a critical vulnerability, but that machine does not pose a risk to any information, to any network, any part of the organization, maybe you document it and focus on things that do. I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, well here's a good example. I remember I got a report once of a machine that was extremely vulnerable on the network. And I took a look at the machine and I recognized the IP address and was like, yes, that's a machine that I use for testing some of my tools to be able to capture the vulnerabilities on there. So it's basically a test machine for vulnerabilities. You know, if I'm teaching something in a class or I'm showing someone how to use Metasploit or whatever, it was Metasploitable, by the way, but that was intentionally a vulnerable machine. And I put enough protections around it that if someone got into it, they couldn't really do much with it on the network that it was on. It was in a special part of the network. But I try to be very thorough, and I want to scan every network. And they found this machine, and the report says, "Hey, this is really vulnerable." Yes, it is. It's supposed to be vulnerable. That's what we use to attack. Now, what I did is I put a process in place that we turn the machine off when we're not using it. So we bring it up on a protected network. When we're not using it, we shut it down. Or we pause the VM. It was a VM, but we just pause the VM. So it's completely legitimate that that machine is vulnerable. And it had a lot of high risk stuff on there. But it was supposed to. It didn't pose as much of a threat to the environment as, say, maybe an Exchange server would have, or a Hyper-V or whatever. So I just had to document that this is a test machine. We use it for training. It's intentionally supposed to be vulnerable so we can use our tools on it. And I felt like that was a good balance. We did implement some controls to protect the machine from the network and vice versa. And we also documented what it was used for and why it needs to be vulnerable and why it was there. That was the closet door, or the door that had a really bad lock on it, but it had coats behind it, so I didn't really care. If it was my Hyper-V server or an Exchange server or a file server and it had those same vulnerabilities on there, you could not have stopped me from shutting down that server until we got it patched. So it's part of the process. So ratings. Every tool is going to probably have a different set of ratings based on that organization, in this case, Tenable, or some of the ones out on the internet. Their ratings for what is critical, what's high, what's medium, and what's low. And it's fine using those. Use them. I use them. When I see a critical, if this tool says this is critical, I am going to focus on that first. Some organizations will try to take a different approach where they rate a vulnerability on a machine that is not equitable to what the report says. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that as long as you can define it. And defining it means you define it to the judge or the investigator or whoever. I mean, it's going to be really hard for you to say, well, Your Honor, we didn't like that this report said that these were all critical, so we'll rename them to these were amber instead of red. We felt like they were less important. And the reason why, I brought this up in a previous episode, if I am on the other side and you were to say that to the judge, I'm going to say, Your Honor, I think that is a bad idea, but I encourage you to go and ask 10 other CISOs out in the world what they think. So the judge isn't taking my word for it. That judge is now going to go and ask 10 CISOs around the world, around the country, around the city, whatever, hey, if you get this report and it says critical, would you relabel it to something that seems to be less important? Do you think this is a good idea? And the reason I'm going to do that being on the other side is because a lot of times a judge or a jury, especially when you put the request onto them saying, please go ask the industry what is standard, they'll do it. They will go and ask people. I have been asked by judges about some stuff. So when you are looking at these reports and you are otherwise looking for things of how to deal with these sorts of criticals, always think about what would 10 other CISOs or professional security people out there say if I do this thing? If I ignore this critical vulnerability, what would those 10 other people say? It's kind of like groupthink. It's kind of like peer pressure, but it's important. It's important to think about because I've seen too often where organizations try to repurpose some of this stuff or try to make decisions on things that most everybody else in the industry is going to go, no, that's a really bad idea. I was working with an organization. This was years ago, and they had a CISO. Title was CISO, and so I was talking with them, and they said, "Well, I'm not really a CISO. I'm a network engineer." Okay, what, are you working on it? Are you working on your training? What do you? He goes, "No, I'm really not." But they needed to have someone with a CISO title in the organization, and they chose me. That's really dangerous in your organization because they may not have the training or the experience to be able to make good decisions in that organization as it relates to cybersecurity. So always think about what other people, in terms of, again, the court, the judge or the jury, is going to go do if you were to make a decision on this that's outside the norm. So if you say I'm going to relabel these as amber instead of red, just think about how that would look to an outside individual. Let's go take a look at one of the other. These are just the vulnerabilities. Here's a good one. So if you're doing an authenticated scan, then a lot of these tools will have it can really pull a lot of information out of the machines, and these will give you some information such as you can pull the administrators group, you've disabled accounts, you have users that never logged in, you can enumerate all local users, you can enumerate all groups. This is the value of the authenticated scans, and this is something I encourage all organizations to do. Is when they're doing a vulnerability scan, you really need to do the authenticated scans because you want the tool to go in there and do a search of your user accounts on the machines. If you've got domain admins logging into desktops, why? If you have vulnerabilities in that, you want to know. So a lot of the tools have a lot of functionality, and this is just one of the reports. Look at this one. OS detections. This is something that, when we talk about CIS 18, what the number one thing is, do you know what you have? What's your hardware inventory? So a lot of these tools can do a scan, and they can determine, or they try to determine, what operating system you have on your machines. Now, if you have an authenticated scan, it's very easy. It can just ask the operating system, what are you? If it's not an operating system or it doesn't have an authenticated user account to authenticate, it tries to determine it. It tries to figure out, like, okay, well, based off these ports and these applications and the way the ping packet came back, with the time to live, whatever it is, they say that's probably a Linux box, or that's probably a Windows box, or probably an Apple box. So it can help you in terms of what does your outlay of your network look like? How many Windows devices? How many Linux? How many whatever? So a lot of these tools will do this for you, and that's going to be really, really helpful. The way I would use it is you take this report and you compare that to the reports that you're running out of your configuration management system or off your domain, or of your own Nmap scans that you do on your network, because you really need to have 2 or 3 or 4 sources of information to have trust in that number or that information that you have. I did an engagement years ago now, and I walked in and I said, and I asked them, I was like, okay, what's your hardware inventory look like? He goes, oh yeah, we got all of our inventory. We've got it in these spreadsheets. We keep track of everything. Oh, this is great. Not a lot of organizations. Yeah, it was a small organization, but not a lot of organizations keep this level of detail. And I was going through that. It's like, okay, Do you mind if I scan real quick and just check your numbers? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go for it. So I pulled up my laptop, brought up a terminal, and I did a quick scan, just a very quick ping sweep across the organization. And I found, oh, I don't remember. I think I found, let's say, and I don't remember the numbers. Let's say I found 3,000 devices. So I looked on their spreadsheet and I scrolled down and they had 1,500 devices. Huh. I was like, well, okay, your report says you have 1,500 devices. Yep, yep, yep. That's what we got, and we keep track of everything. But my scan came up with 3,000 devices. And again, I don't remember the actual numbers anymore. But my report says I've got 3,000 devices. What? I was like, okay, this IP address is not on your report, your spreadsheet. But here is my scan of it, a quick nmap, and it's saying this is probably a Windows box, it's probably this, and here's the ports it has open, and this is what it's doing. Because, well, I don't know what that is. And we did this for 4, 5, 6 machines. Well, at that point, he now realizes that he doesn't have a good inventory, and the process that he thought was really good, it didn't capture everything. Looking at reports from your vulnerability scan, that helps you in that process. You should be looking at your data, your inventory of your devices. You should be looking at internal scans that you're doing looking for devices. That's the difference between active and passive scanning of your hardware devices. You take this report and you say, okay, how many Windows boxes do I have? How many Apple? Add them together. This is how many devices I should have. So it's just one more piece to the process of evaluating how many devices you have. But when you get this report, and you should ask for this report, you should ask for anything you can get out of the vulnerability scan. This report will give you, okay, how many devices do you think you have? How many Windows? How many Apple? How many? Now, they may not be 100% accurate because passive scanning or unauthenticated scanning, it's not perfect, and sometimes it says, "Hey, this is Apple," and you look and it's a Linux box, or it says, "Oh, this is Linux," and it just happened to be a Windows box because the scan just wasn't very good. You had extra ports shut down on the firewall, so it couldn't really, I mean, there's a little bit of art and magic to it, but sometimes it just can't figure it out. But it gives you a good idea. If your numbers generally look the same, like this one, it says total all OS detections is 167, and on your device inventory you have 169 computers on your network, I would say that's a pretty good correlation. Okay, I've got 169 devices in my inventory. There might have been one or two turned off, but there's 167 on the scan. Great. It's a good support for your inventory. If you see a number that's really off base, now let me tell you this. What if you have, let's say, 3,000 devices and this only comes up with 1,000 scanned? Your scanner may not be able to see all your devices. That's a different kind of problem. You need to go and fix that and make sure your scanner can see those devices. So regardless of what the number is, it helps you. It helps you make good decisions on your network. Do you know how many devices you have? Let's go verify it. If it's above, that's one decision. If it's below, that's a different decision. But it's still a management decision. All right, let's jump out of this one. Let's see what else we got. Here is exploitable vulnerabilities. And generally, if I remember these correct, what these are is some of the tools out there have a cross check for known vulnerability proof of concepts. So if a vulnerability on a machine, so let's say this remote code execution of the MS14066 or 066, if there are known attacks out there or known proof of concepts, then it rates it a little higher and it says, hey, this is actively being exploited. Now, what do you do in your environment if you find a machine that has a vulnerability, a known vulnerability, that has known proof of concept and is being actively exploited. So let me say it again. You get this report, you get a list of machines that have known vulnerabilities, that have active proof of concept code in the wild. So out on the internet, someone has put up a piece of code that takes advantage of this vulnerability, and they're seeing active exploitation. What that means is someone else in the world is getting actively exploited by this particular code. What do you do as an organization? Now, I don't have the music to give you some time to to think about your answer. But my advice is you do whatever you have to protect that system immediately. You have vulnerabilities, vulnerable machines that are vulnerable to active code on the internet doing bad things, i.e., you have bad people taking advantage of that code to do bad things on your network. So you should shut them down. Now, that could be you shut down the firewall for those machines so no one can get to them, put an additional firewall in place, could shut the machine down. Maybe you unplug the network cord. Maybe you shut it down in the virtual environment. Whatever you've got to do. If you have active exploitation in the system, you have active exploitable vulnerabilities, and people are attacking that, you've got to do whatever you can to protect your system. If you don't, again, let's think back to the investigator. What do you think they're going to say? They're going to question you, say, okay, you knew that these were actively being exploited. You knew that the code is out there, and you knew you had this particular vulnerability on your environment. Why didn't you shut it down? Again, you don't want to be on the other side having to answer that question, especially when you didn't shut it down. Now, one of the things that I did years ago, we when we think about WannaCry and the vulnerabilities of Eternal Blue and such, it can be really hard to patch all your machines from a brand new vulnerability. So you look at these vulnerabilities, MS14-066. If that came out last month and we're still in our patch management cycle, I may not have pushed that patch to all the machines in my environment. It takes time. But when you have active exploitation, such as WannaCry all those years ago, where people across the world, it was traveling from computer network to computer network to computer network across Europe, across a variety of networks all over the world. So you have active exploitation. What do you do? I can't get patches out just because of resources. We know it's coming. It hasn't hit us yet. What do you do? Well, what I did was I had my team create a set of firewall rules that we called break glass. So break glass 1, 2, 3, 4. And they were literally 1, 2, 3, 4 on the firewall rule set, for the Palo Altos. And those firewall rule sets were really simple. They shut it all down. Now you could just unplug the network, but that causes some problems, especially with life safety systems, whatever. So we needed to be able to do an effective shutdown of the network, keep critical systems up, provide access to be able to turn on and off networks and whatever. So we had 4 or 5 rules, I think it was 4, and we called them break glass 1, 2, 3, 4. And the whole intent was if we saw a WannaCry coming across the internet and we saw networks, then we could turn on. They were disabled. We just enabled those 4 rules. And the network would go down, effectively go down. So there'd be no crosstalk between zones, nothing inbound and outbound from the internet. We would still have VPN access for certain people into the core infrastructure. We'd have certain services on campus that was still up and running, such as life safety systems. But effectively, it would shut down everything else. Now, the reason why we did that is because we knew that in some cases we would not have the ability to patch all of the machines. We also knew that those machines, if they had gotten compromised, would cause much bigger problems than just shutting it down. So I was fairly comfortable being able to tell an investigator or a judge or whoever that in the event that we had active exploitation of a critical vulnerability that was affecting the world, and before it got to the environment that I was in, thunk, we'd shut it down. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was a process to mitigate risk. It would be, that was the last resort or second to last resort, and we never had to use it. There was a couple of times that I almost thought about doing it, but we didn't. But that was again risk mitigation. If anybody were to come to me and said, "What did you do for this vulnerability?" and my response was going to be, I had these that we had in place. We had already done change management. We had it ready to go. We had everything, configured in a way that we still have access. We turned it on. We shut down the network. I think that that in itself is a good mitigation control for risk for the organization. So I know I got off on that um, rabbit hole, but it was important to talk about, and it's something that you need to think about because when you're looking at this report, again, your job is to mitigate risk. What are you going to do to mitigate a critical risk to your organization? That might be you patch your machines, like we said earlier. That might be you shut down the network. Understanding that shutting down the network means business doesn't run. But what are you going to protect? What are you protecting in those cases? So I think in upcoming episodes, one of the things that we're going to do is talk about business continuity and talk about more about the break glass stuff and things like that, because I think that that's something that people don't think about in their environments is what if we do have to shut down? What are the steps we need to do to bring it back up? We talk about disaster recovery, if our data center goes away, but business continuity is a little different. We can intentionally take down networks to protect the environment, but we still got to be able to make sure the business runs. So that might be I'm pretty sure that's going to be a future episode. We're going to talk about that, talk about what I've done in the past, and things you can think about in your environment. So, all right, it is midnight 54. So I think we've covered a lot of this stuff. I hope it was useful for everybody. This is very important. Every organization should do vulnerability assessments. They should also do pen tests, and they are different. They should also do risk assessments and risk analysis. I mean, there's a lot of things. This was specifically a vulnerability assessment from a tool. Now, there are a lot of tools. Nessus is one from Tenable. There's Nexpose. There's OpenVAS. I mean, there's all kinds of different tools out there, and they're all pretty good. I've never had any issue with any of them. They all have their own strengths, their own weaknesses. I've used Nessus and Tenable probably the most because that's what we had in a couple of the organizations that I worked for or worked in, and it's a good tool. I really like it. But I would say any tool that you get a report on and you make decisions on is going to be gold for you. That's the key issue. Take the report, make decisions on it. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the evening. It's technically Friday now, so it's the end of the week. I hope you have a great Friday. I'm going to shut off the stream and let it do its processing to go live, and we'll see you next time. I'm trying to decide what next week's topic is going to be. I got a couple of different topics on hand. We're still going to cover some Graham-Leach-Bliley things. So the Graham-Leach-Bliley we were covering last year, they extended it 6 months. So we've got a little bit of time to finish up that list of objectives or list of things to talk about. I've also got some HIPAA, some CMMC, just a variety of things. So Um, it'll be fun. It'll be a fun new year in 2023. The new job is going great. I'm really enjoying it. So it's not that it's necessarily freeing up time for me to do this project, but it's a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying the team that I'm working on, and the things that I'm doing, and I'll tell you the things that I'm doing is really reinforcing the stuff that we cover here on Sleepless and Cyber. So have a great night, everybody, or a great morning, and we'll see you next week.